Hello and welcome to the very, very, very first episode of the Godless Moms podcast featuring me and my friend Janice Selby,
Yay!
who you might know as Divorcing Religion or Wise Counselor on the Twitters. She's a counselor. And we thought we'd start this episode with introducing ourselves and kind of introducing what the podcast is about or what it's going to be about. So the whole idea behind this podcast is that you can ask us questions, you can send them in, or you can post them in the chat as well. And we'll try and give you our best advice as atheist moms. So it could be parenting questions, parenting advice, or literally anything. We're not looking for religion here. We're looking more at like helping atheists kind of live a better secular life or raise their kids secular. And so if you have questions to do with any of that sort of thing, you can send them in to us. There's information in the description down below. And you can also post it in the chat and we would be happy to answer your questions. And I'm going to introduce you to my friend Janice now. Janice, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became an atheist?
I do. And that's a big deal. Hi, everyone. I was raised in a fundamentalist Christian home. So in my family, they believed that the Bible was literally true. So 6-day creation, 1 day resting, all that kind of stuff. So my parents both believed that. And then my dad, unfortunately, is quite a narcissist and very authoritarian. It's funny how those folks are drawn to religion, but they sure are. So that was the background for everything that I heard and learned about being religious, was a very black and white authoritarian sort of setting. So I became really comfortable with following rules, pardon me, from an early age, because my dad was volatile and unpredictable in his temper. And so if my siblings and I could have some understanding of rules in the household, then, it's easier to live with someone who's volatile. So that also was in the background for me. I just really gravitated towards rules, of course, real goody two-shoes in school. And then when I grew up, I got married to a fellow who became a pastor. And I became much more fundamentalist than my parents ever were. So when I grew up, we had TV channels and we had radio, but there were restrictions on what we could watch. But when we were raising our kids, when my kids were small, there was no TV. There was no, I didn't want them interacting with the world at all. I wanted no secular influences. I started wearing a head covering. I got rid of all my makeup, all my jewelry. I didn't even wear a wedding ring. No wedding ring. So I was quite serious about religion, and I wasn't just pretending. It really was who I was. I thought I was being the best person that I could be by following the Bible as literally as I could, the New Testament anyway. And so I think there was a lot of pressure for my daughters in that environment. And I homeschooled them. And so we were just as the girls were getting to be, 10 years old or whatever. And when I would have really started enforcing purity culture. So some of those things made their way into our family and into our daily life. But fortunately, it wasn't too long after that things really just kind of fell apart for me as far as my beliefs went. So as I said, I was married to a man who became a pastor, and it was while we were attending his Bible college in a small town that I started noticing ladies who looked quite different. And they are the ones who wore the head coverings and always very modest clothing. I'm trying to find out, why do they dress like that? They're not Amish, but what is it? And so I found out they were a type of closed Mennonite. And the more research I did and started reading the New Testament more closely, and I saw that there actually were Bible verses in there about women dressing modestly and not cutting their hair, and wearing, having their hair covered. And I thought, well, I want to be that close to God. I want to be a real Christian, not a fake Christian. So that's when I really went down that rabbit hole and started trying to, just became quite fundamentalist. And but at the same time, I sometimes chafed when my husband at the time, if he would if he would call me out on something, or I wasn't being quite as maybe submissive or whatever as he would like. And so I just remember one time, I was really tired. I'd done the grocery shopping and the dishes and laundry and everything else, and homeschooled the kids. And I asked him after dinner if he would help me by clearing the table. And he said, why? And I said, well, because it would make a good example for our daughters if they saw their dad helping clear the table. And he said, if you're so concerned about setting a good example, why don't you do it yourself with a servant's heart? Yes, I know, that look on your face. I was like, what? It felt like being punched in the gut. And I will say that did not typify him. Like he really is quite a fairly relaxed kind of person. And I think it was my dive into fundamentalism that made him more and more uncomfortable. He didn't want to be like the in charge one and everything. He preferred more of an equal kind of arrangement. And so as I was going more and more into the fundamentalist mindset, it was forcing him into a position he wasn't comfortable with. The irony there being, of course, that when I started wearing a head covering, to me it was an act of outward submission, because I felt there were problems in our marriage and they must have been my fault because I was too outspoken. So my head covering was a visible sign and a reminder to me that I needed to be more quiet and subservient to him. But I tell you, that is not an easy, not for this gal. It was tricky. And then eventually it's just like, if you hold a beach ball under the water for too long and the pressure's building, that thing's going to come springing up and it's going to be messy. Water's going to get everywhere. And that's kind of what it was like for me. The tighter and tighter I kind of wrapped my corset of Christianity, the harder it was for me. And then we went through a couple of years that were very tough, lots of tragedies in our family. And that, for me, that was just it. The final straw was when our youngest child was stricken with a life-threatening illness. And at that point, I thought, what the hell? There is no God if this is the situation. Who would inflict such a thing on an innocent child? So that kind of combined with other things that had been simmering for me, that was it. And that was when I knew I'd bet on the wrong horse, and I had to start doing some very uncomfortable exploration.
Yeah. So now you do counseling that has like focus on religious trauma. You help people like yourself. Did you want to tell us about that?
Absolutely, yes. So when I left my religion, and I also left my marriage after about 20 years, I went back to school and I became a registered professional counselor. And mind you, I was still trying to figure out a lot of things about myself and my own background and what happened with religion, because I was starting to see that there was a cult mentality to the things, the way that I was living and the way that I'd been taught. So I really started investigating about cults and how people get drawn into authoritarian groups and so forth. And then thankfully, one day I happened upon Dr. Marlene Winnell, and she wrote a book called Leaving the Fold, which I hope that everybody would read if they've come out of a religious background. And I hope that all therapists also would read Leaving the Fold. And I just had such a connection with Marlene right away. And I asked her when I could come see her. She was in California and she was doing a retreat. So I flew out there, and I knew from that point on that was really the place for me as far as therapy, is working with people who are recovering from religious trauma and religious trauma syndrome.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you know that I'm vice president over at International Association of Atheists, and I've found that a lot of the people that approach us to be volunteers are people who are looking to help themselves through helping other people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it's cool. I think that's a really great way to get yourself through some things too, is by helping other people.
Oh, yeah.
Um, yeah.
And when it
And
comes to grief, and if people are trying to make sense of grief, doing exactly what you're talking about, volunteering, can help kind of bring a sense of purpose to
yeah.
that grief.
Mhm. And now you do your own workshop over at divorcingreligion.com,
Mm-hmm.
which I would definitely, if any of you out there are struggling after leaving religion, I would definitely suggest going and checking that out. It is worth it. I had the pleasure of redoing your whole workshop PDF, and so I got to read through it all, and it's full of amazing stuff. So you
Oh,
definitely
thanks for that. Yeah, it was super cathartic for me developing the workshop. And it goes over 6 weeks, and we meet every Sunday morning virtually for a couple of hours, go through what we're learning in the workshop, and just support each other on our journeys as we leave fundamentalist religion behind. And it can be, I've had folks who came out of Orthodox Judaism, very strong Roman Catholicism, evangelicalism, Jehovah's Witness background. um, there are some differences there, but our grief is very much the same.
Yeah, it's I've found through doing all of this stuff that there's no religion that is exempt from people feeling almost traumatized after they leave, like they feel grief after they've left it, and there's a lot of people in all different religions who need help and assistance and guidance and just getting to a regular secular life that they feel good about. There's no religion that's exempt from that.
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely true.
um, and as far as I go, I think a lot of you guys, since this is on my channel and my Facebook page, you guys probably all know me already. But just as a recap, I I was never religious, so this is kind of where you're going to get two different perspectives or two different backgrounds here that is going to help develop our perspective on this podcast. I was never religious. I was raised in a completely godless family, and I didn't even really know who or what God was until I was like 10 or 11. Like, I would hear people say God and stuff like that, but I didn't really understand. I didn't
Mhm.
understand what it was. I didn't know what church was. I didn't know what praying was. I felt very, very weird. If I was ever at a friend's house and they were saying grace before dinner, I was like, what the hell is going on? so so yeah, and I've done a lot of my learning about religion and stuff like that since I started writing as Godless Mom on my website.
Mhm.
Um, and it's like I realized that I did not know very much at all um about religion. So I know a little bit now. Um and some of it I wish I didn't. But that's me. I've never been religious. And so we've got Janice's perspective on parenting, coming from a religious background and transitioning to a secular or humanist kind of position on parenting, and then you've got my perspective, being basically raised in a secular humanist household, and actually my dad was raised by atheists too. So
Wow.
I think I might even be fourth generation
You're so
atheist.
lucky.
Yeah. I am definitely glad that that is how I was raised. Definitely thankful to my parents for that. So thanks,
Mhm.
mom and dad. My mom's downstairs getting my dog right now. So hi, mom. Um,
Hi, Mom. Mm.
so should we hop into the first question? Because we do have some questions that we put together from emails that people have sent me before asking for advice, and I know you've popped some in there as well, things that people brought up with you. So first question that we could answer is a really difficult one, just to make it interesting. Um, and it was a single father who reached out to me, and he wondered how to deal with his situation. Basically, he's an atheist separated from his 10-year-old son's mother, who is religious, and she's now married to a religious man. They share custody, and recently his son told him that he no longer believes in God or Jesus or the Bible. For now, they're keeping this from the child's mother out of fear she will accuse dad of brainwashing his son, and he asked me, what should I do? So,
That's a
not,
pretty big question.
yeah, that's not an easy situation to deal with. Did you want to start?
Sure. So the mom has remarried, it sounded like, to someone who is religious, right?
Yeah.
Um, one of the first things I think that would be important for birth dad, to tackle or to make sure that stepdad has nothing to do with disciplining his son. There's to be no physical discipline, and even as far as rules for discipline in the house. I feel like that's something that needs to be discussed between the mom and the dad of this child. And boy, I think it's fantastic that his son has reached this conclusion on his
Mhm.
own, that he doesn't believe the Bible, is not interested in religion, it sounds like. So dad really needs to be encouraging this young person, really celebrating the fact that his child is starting to use some critical thinking. And we always want to be praising that. When we see our kids questioning things, we want to praise them for it, because we want to raise people who think for themselves. So I think those are also really important. Um, as far as telling mom when mom is very religious, that is super uncomfortable. But it's dad's job also to do his best to support his son and to protect his son.
Mhm.
So he might start by asking the son what he either what he would be worried about if mom found out, and does he what kind of a difference would it make for the son if he did tell the mom. And certainly offering support. Dad can be there, or dad can tell mom, and this is a child. So we want to make sure there's adequate support there. So yeah, it's an uncomfortable situation, but it's one that I think is pretty much going to have to be dealt with. Can also look into the idea of some kind of mediation.
Yeah.
Is there a mediator that can walk them through this, because it is significant?
Mhm. One of the problems though I think with mediation in a situation like this is, like in BC, when you're going through the family court system, and you can get a mediator um through the family court system,
Mm-hmm.
is that if you're in the States, or if you're in a country where there's a high amount of religiosity, the chances are you're going to get a mediator who's religious, and that can actually play against you
Mm-hmm.
in that situation. So definitely be careful with that. But yeah, I think in the sense of like an objective third party, I think that's a really good idea, but they have to really be objective.
And
And
then maybe there's a place, certainly for contacting groups like Secular Therapy Project,
yeah,
seculartherapy.org, and there you can find a therapist in your area that is secular, and perhaps they can point you in a direction to help, or any other humanist or secular groups. Use them as resources to help navigate this. They can maybe point in the right direction.
yeah. I think there are some groups out there that even will help you navigate like the family court system if you're an
Mm-hmm.
atheist.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, I've had a lot of people contact me over the years telling me that they lost custody or what little custody and
Mm.
access to their kids that they did have because judges, they ruled that part of being a good parent is taking their child to church. And if you're not taking your child to church, you're not suited to being a good parent, which is just insane. Um,
Right. And I would encourage people, even if one parent is religious and they insist on taking the child to church, you still have the opportunity and perhaps the obligation, when you're with the child, to be reaffirming your child's choice as a human, their autonomy, be digging into things like science books for children, just because you want to be striving for more of a balance instead of such a one-sided religious view that they're going to be getting from the one parent.
yeah. Um, I would say too, like in this situation, usually when somebody comes to me and says, "When should I come out?" As an atheist, and sometimes they've asked that about being in the LGBTQ plus
Mm-hmm.
community. And I always say to them, the very first thing that you have to do is assess whether or not you are going to be safe if you come out.
Excellent.
You
Yeah.
need to. Are you going to be kicked out of your home? Are you going to become homeless? Are you in the middle of schooling that your family is paying for that you have no other way to pay for? And you have to kind of weigh what's the most important thing to you. Can you wait a year before you come out so you can finish your schooling, or so you have some time to get some money together so you can put a roof over your own head, stuff
Mhm.
like that. But you have to definitely make sure that you're safe because we all know Mubarak Bala, when he came out to his family, he was beaten and drugged and he was thrown into a mental institution. Now, obviously, that sort of thing is illegal in Canada and in the US, but there's plenty of countries out there where those things still happen to atheists and members of the LGBTQ plus community.
Mhm.
And even worse things happen to them. So the first thing you need to do is make sure that you're safe before you come out. But in this case, if the child comes out to his family or to his mother and she says she kicks him out, he can go live with his dad.
Mhm.
Um, but you definitely have to make sure that there's not going to be any violence or
Yes.
any kind
Yeah.
of repercussions like that. Because
I
I
love
mean,
that.
yeah,
That's
you
such
have
wise
to be careful.
counsel.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and we talk about um, beginning with the end in mind. So
Hmm.
anytime you're considering having a really difficult conversation, or if you're feeling passionate about something, feel like I need to tell my family or my whomever about this, begin with the end in mind. You want to examine what your motivation is for the disclosure and what your hopeful goal is, what your end goal that you'd love to see. And then also take the time to actually look at what are possible reactions that might happen instead of what you're hoping for.
Hmm.
Because when we come out to our parents who likely raised us with religious beliefs, or a spouse we married when we were religious, and we are giving them what to us is great news. Hey, I'm free of this religious nonsense. I don't believe it anymore. That is the worst news as far
Yeah.
as they're concerned. Because they're still entrenched in that belief system and that worldview. And you've just essentially told them you're going to hell, or you're not going to be together for eternity, or whatever, however it is that they are likely to perceive it. So you are right. We need to be thinking about these things before divulging them, and safety does have to come first.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And as far as the like a child goes, um I always just suggest, like, if because I have been contacted by children who have
Mm,
asked me this, and I always suggest, just, if you feel that there are going to be negative repercussions on your life, if you feel there's going to be um punishments, or you're going to be thrown out or anything like that, just wait. Like, childhood, it doesn't last forever. Um, when you're my age, it's just a tiny blip you barely even remember. So, um,
mhm,
you know, um, just you gotta stay safe first. But I always try to urge people to um, be honest. When it's possible, when it's safe and it's possible to be honest. And the next thing that I always tell people to do is, once you have come out, is to set very, very clear boundaries. And because often what happens, and this is not my experience obviously, but what I've heard from many, many people, often what happens is that people will then have their family kind of pushing the religious beliefs on them, and
mhm,
trying to encourage them to come back to church, or to do this or
mhm,
to do that. And sometimes it becomes really overbearing, and just too much to handle. And so I always tell those people, in this situation, you have got to set your boundaries very, and you have to make sure that those boundaries are clear, because I don't know if you have anybody in your life who has a tendency to beat around the bush. They don't say exactly what they mean. You know what I mean? Because they're afraid of of conflict. A lot of people are afraid of conflict, and I'm no stranger to that. Like, I don't like conflict either. But in these situations, you have to say exactly what you mean. You have to draw that line, and it has to be very clear so the other person understands. And then you have to be very clear about what the consequences are if they cross that boundary,
mhm,
and you
mhm.
have to follow through if they cross that boundary.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. And that's, pardon me, that's exactly what we're talking about, beginning with the end in mind. And I know um, when I told my parents, so I was in my 40s when I told my parents, so they were like in their late 70s, early 80s, that I didn't believe anymore. And I generally wouldn't have even felt the need to tell them, except my dad is so freaking pushy, being a narcissist, a diagnosed narcissist. Um, and he's so pushy, and he would just have to make the biggest show. Anytime if we went out for dinner, he was going to stand up and say grace or whatever the thing was. And when I told him, I'm not playing this game anymore, I don't believe the same way as you, and I don't, that's not going to be a topic of discussion when we're together again. And the first time I told him, he cried and cried. Um, and I was like, okay, whatever, I'll allow him this, as he's trying to get used to what I'm telling him. And then anytime we were together after that, if we were doing family occasions or whatever, if he started in with the Jesus this, Jesus that, or talking to my children about their salvation or anything, I absolutely very firmly let him know that the visit would end if he
yeah,
didn't stop right then. And sometimes that meant the visit ended.
yeah,
Sometimes it meant I got up and got my purse and walked out the door, or I told him he would have to go home until we were able to have a talk without this. Um, and those can be really hard situations to be in, but don't set the boundary if you're not going to be able to enforce it.
yeah, yeah. That's the key, is because if you don't and we're kind of going through this in our family for a totally different subject, nothing to do with religion. But if you don't set those boundaries and then follow through with what you say the consequences are going to be, you basically are telling that person that when you set boundaries, they're optional. And they'll people, that there are people like that who will take, when they see that opportunity, they'll take the opportunity. And so you absolutely have to set the boundary. You have to follow through. The follow through is probably the most important part.
Yep.
I've had to do it with other things. Like some of it's not just religion. Like I'm sure that you guys have all heard me say before that my mom has some interesting ideas about alternative medicine, and at times vaccinations. Although she is fully vaccinated, and she got me vaccinated and my brother, and
Well
she's
done.
gonna get the COVID vaccination.
Okay,
So
good.
but she has some strange ideas about vaccinations. And I've had to say, okay, this is not something that we're going to be talking about
Hmm.
around my kids. If my kids want to come to me with questions about vaccinations and stuff like that, that's totally fine. But I don't want my mom pushing strange ideas on them.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
you definitely have to set those boundaries, and you have to follow through. And sometimes it sucks. Like sometimes it just sucks so bad when you have to follow through. And you know what? It's the same thing when you're a parent, because you have to do the same thing with your
Yeah.
set boundaries, right? And you have
Yeah.
to follow through, and it sucks when you have to follow through with those the consequences. I hate it so much, but you have to
Right.
do it, otherwise people just take advantage of you.
And so then, I mean, sometimes there is something to be said then for being as gentle and flexible as we can be. There are some situations where no, there that would be a danger to have a flexible boundary, but that's not in every situation. So yeah, we really need to be thinking about those things. And I will say, givers must set limits because takers rarely do. That
Yeah.
is just that is just how it goes, and it makes it hard.
Yeah. It's definitely difficult. And definitely things that I've had to deal with too in my life. So
It's not. It's hard being a mom. Damn it! It's
yeah.
hard, and a dad. It's not easy raising kids. That's for sure.
No, I absolutely I do not like having to follow through with consequences. Like I hate that so much because I just want to have fun with
Mhm.
my kids and just,
Mhm.
hang out and stuff like that. But sometimes you have to. Um but as far as the father goes, who sent in that question, I think what he should do is just sit down with the child, and he should find out how important it is to his son that he tell his mother that he doesn't believe. And just make sure that you, as a father, make sure that you convey really clearly that you are there for your son regardless of how he deals with this, that you're there and you'll always be there, and that you support him. And even if he did decide to go back to church and do all the religious stuff, that you would still be there to support him. That's my opinion.
Beautiful point. I love that. That's so true. That really is being a supportive parent, saying I love you no matter what, and recognizing that 10 years old, still very much a child. So there will be some guidance that's required. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a sticky situation though. I fear that his ex-wife would definitely think that he was brainwashing the kid too. I don't know how you would change her mind, but I think at some point you just have to not care that she thinks that,
It and
right?
it
Like,
partly might depend on the mom's relationship with the child. So, I
yeah.
mean, dad could ask the child, the son, what are you afraid might happen, or what do you think? might happen. What are you worried about? If mom found out, are you worried about anything? And don't lead him with answers. Let him actually tell you, oh, I haven't really thought about it, or I'm not worried, or I think she's going to make me get baptized, or whatever the thing is. Um, yeah. Oh gosh. I'm glad I'm not in that. I'm glad I'm not in that situation. And I do want to remind our friends who've joined us for this podcast too that this is two godless moms giving opinions and potentially talking about how we've navigated some issues. So what we say here is not to take the place of your own time in therapy with your own therapist.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So there's a few questions in here, I think. Let's see if we can get to some questions in here. Um, so here's one from Tristan.
Mm-hmm.
I share your experience, Janice. I went through the exact same. My mother had the same personality, and I had to get a master's degree in theology. I grew up exceptionally fundamentalist and also followed the Bible literally, went through numerous pastors as mentors, and I got kicked out of numerous churches and started battling with the Dutch Reformed Church in South Africa about their homophobia during my bachelor's. Um, so yeah, I mean it's everywhere and so many people go through this stuff and it I- it blows my mind because honestly I did not know that this stuff happened before I started doing the whole godless mom thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And something that I find really interesting about the point that we're at in history right now, I don't think there's ever been such a mass exodus from churches in the United States as there have been over the past 4 years because of the rise of Trump and the Christians really standing behind him, getting into bed with him, if you will. And that has really driven the rise of the nuns, people who are now claiming no religious affiliation. And I'm just so happy and pleased that people are seeing reality for what it is and starting to make their own choices, particularly second generation folks like me. You were raised in it, you were steeped in the beliefs from the start, and this is the very first time you're really poking your head up above the surface and saying, you know what, I don't want to be like this anymore. And that takes a
Mhm.
lot of courage.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So we have a question for you as well. This is from Simon. Hi, Simon. I know Simon. Um, so the question is, Janice, do you find that the strong cultural influence that religion can have makes the journey more difficult? And how do you keep your connection to your culture alive in that journey?
Pardon me. um, I think this is particularly if folks live in the United States. So I live in Canada, and it's not as much of an issue here, religion. But I think it could be even harder for folks who live in the States, or if we're talking about the rest of my family is still religious, then what do I do? How do I maintain those ties? And that's such a um, personal decision for people to make. It is a lot harder to walk away. I mean, if you're Jehovah's Witness, if you're raised Jehovah's Witness and you leave that, there's a good chance you'll be completely written off by your family. You won't have any contact with them again. Same with certain branches of Mormonism and Amish. So then you have to start rebuilding your community, and it's a lot harder, but it's very possible. And that's why I want you to connect with our podcast, following Courtney, following me as well, to help rebuild that community that's been lost.
Is that a kitty?
Yes, that's Steve. My cat is named Steve.
It's similar. It's weird because I've built up this community around me too, and I was never religious, so it's not like I needed to build a new community, but it just happened. There's so many great, amazing atheists out there who just they want to bring you into the fold, and it's such a if you're in the right areas of the internet, it's such a welcoming place to be and such a positive place to be. So I think that's one place to start kind of rebuilding and determining what your own culture is, and you can incorporate parts of your old culture. Like for me, um my mom was raised a little bit religious, although she always told us that her parents sent her mom had 5 kids in 4 years because she had
Oh
twins,
my God.
and her parents always sent them to church on Sunday so that they could have sex.
Yep.
um, um and but you can, like, my mom always threw us like this amazing Christmas, and now we value Christmas a lot despite the fact that I've never been Christian a day in my life. So you can incorporate parts of that culture, your old culture, into a culture that you've designed for yourself, that it is yours,
Mm,
and build your own community around that, filled with
mhm,
people who accept you, regardless of whether they're religious or not. I don't have a problem with religious people in my life. There's lots of religious people in my life who I love and respect. So you can build a new community around you of people who accept who you are, just the
mhm,
way you are, and incorporate things from your old culture into it that you
mhm.
value.
Yeah, and we do talk about this in the divorcing religion workshop as well. And it's not, some people, they look around one day and they see that, okay, this is not true, the things that I've been taught in my religion. And so they are quite quickly an atheist. I wasn't that way, and many people aren't. There's a transition period that takes place. And in fact, it took me a number of years before I could even say that I was an atheist, because I was so fully indoctrinated. And so some people must have a complete break with that culture because it is just much too triggering and harmful. It's been so terrible for them. And then later on down the road, they might say, you know what, I actually thought this part of it was fun, or I enjoyed this, and they can kind of do just what you said, make it their own. It's your
Mhm.
life. There are no life police. You get to decide what you're going to keep in your life, what you're not going to have in your life, and how it's going to look for you. It doesn't have to
Mhm.
look exactly the way it did. Put your own spin on things. Do some research. Find out what other people do who've come out of that really tight background, and what ways do they like to celebrate. And yeah, it's
Yeah.
fun. You get to decide who you are and what your life looks like now.
Yeah, exactly. And you can hang on to the things that matter to you, and you can let go of the things that hurt and or are not good for you or whatever. You don't have to just cling to things just because they've always been. There's plenty of different ways to celebrate things and different ways to explore the world and just be you in the world. So it's totally up to you, I think. I think we have some time for another question that I have for us.
Okay.
Um, so somebody wants to know how they give their kids community without church. She has 2 children who are 3 and 8. Or sorry, it's a father. He has 2 children who are 3 and 8, and his wife is on the fence, I guess, with religion. And growing up in church was always more of a social event to him than anything spiritual. And he had really, really good times. And he feels like he is robbing his children of that if he doesn't take them to church. What do you
Mm.
think about that, Janice?
um, I think that it would be great for that mom and dad to start getting creative and start looking into alternative communities for their children to become a part of. So whether it's sports or creative endeavors, um, there's also Sunday Assembly and UU, which is, I think, Universal Unitarian. So those are groups that are like open to everyone, rather than church is pretty much, it's my way or the highway. It's Jesus or nobody. And I will say, even though, so youth pastors go out of their way to try and think up fun ways. They have a purpose to that. They want to get their hooks into your kid. They want to convert your child to their belief system. So it's great that this dad never got sucked into that, but that doesn't mean that wouldn't happen to their child. So I would really be looking around for other sources of community for them to get their kids plugged into.
Yeah, I totally agree. And coming from a background of somebody who was raised without religion, we always had community in many different ways. I think the first kind of version of community that I had was my family. I had seven cousins and a little brother, and on my mom's side, and we were all very close. So I had, because my grandma had 5 kids in 4 years.
We know
She
what they
said
were
that
doing on
once.
Sunday mornings. Yeah.
But we were a close-knit family, and we had big Christmas dinners and big dinners for everybody's birthday and stuff like that. And so that was my first community, and it had nothing to do with religion. And then it was the street that I lived on. We lived on a cul-de-sac, and it was all oddly, it was all girls my age in every house. So there was lots of community going on there. My parents got along really well with all of their parents, and we used to go
Wow.
on, like, we would go to Disneyland in a big convoy of Volkswagen vans all the way down to Disneyland stuff. So that was also it. And then my mom also, she was a teacher, an elementary school teacher, so she got to be a part of the exchange program for teachers. So we got to live in Australia for a
Wow.
year in 1986 and then a year in 1992. And both times you're in this club called the Exchange Club, and it was all the teachers that had exchanged to that area from other parts of the world that year. And so, that was a community for us. It was
Mhm.
it was tight, and it was a lot of fun. Like, those are some of the best memories I've ever had. And now that I'm a mom and I have kids, we live in a small town, and we live about an hour away from Janice.
We do.
It's gonna snow soon too. It's supposed to snow all next week. Um, um, but we live in this small town, and it's very tight knit here, and everybody knows, like, who my son is. If they ever saw him in trouble on the street or anything like that, they would all pull over and help him.
So nice.
Um, and then we also have the schools that he goes to. Like, you can get involved in the parent teacher
Mm-hmm.
organizations, stuff like that. And there was also Cubs. Joey
Mm-hmm.
was in Cubs. My son Joey was in Cubs. And we had a small community around that. And prior to him going to public school, he went to a private Montessori school, and there was a big community around that. And so you can find community around anything. Like, you can find it around, he has a baseball team, and all the baseball parents, we're all kind of a big family. And so you can find community that centers around anything. It doesn't have to be centered on religion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the saddest things that I've realized since I started doing this whole Godless Mom thing, is that a lot of people think that that's the only way that you can have any kind of community, is if you go to church, which is just so
Mm-hmm.
strange to me. It's like, my whole life I've had all these different communities, and I've never once been religious. It's just
Mm-hmm.
really weird to me.
And I mean, we'd be remiss not to mention that it's obviously harder right now because of the virus, because we're not able to be going out and interacting and building those communities in person, at least not in British Columbia, not in Canada right now. They're really frowning on that for our own health and safety. So
Yeah.
yeah, it does make things harder. And then exactly what you were mentioning, Courtney, the family becomes the community. And
Yeah.
so in cases where there might be abuse going on in the home, this makes it much harder because
Yeah.
the kids aren't able to get out. Um, but still, we need to be looking and being creative and trying to think, how can I help my child build their sense of community? And you have to be extra careful when you're doing things online because you don't actually know who's on the other side of the computer.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. As far as the parent who wrote in to me goes, my advice to them would be to get involved in things in the community around you that have nothing to do with religion, things that your kids are interested in. And I know that it's difficult right now during the pandemic, but once that's over, you can definitely, get them involved in baseball or soccer or hockey.
You are
Well,
Canadian.
it's so expensive and it's such a time-consuming thing. I'm so glad my son doesn't play hockey. Um,
Also,
but
what about the idea of different charities
yeah,
and exposing our kids to the needs of others? And then we're looking at humanism and being a secular humanist, and yeah, exploring all of that with your child can be another helpful way to be building community for them. It's not an easy task in the situation we're in, but it's still possible.
yeah, for sure. That's something that we've talked about with our kids a lot too, is like just going to like the food bank. You can go and volunteer there, and some food banks will let children volunteer, like just for like sorting the groceries and stuff
Mhm,
like that. and
mhm,
and you get to meet a lot of the people in your community that way.
mhm,
um and my dad, part of me growing up was my dad ran a bunch of nonprofits. He was always involved in nonprofits, and he would have us there. Me and my brother were there during different events and stuff like that. And it sets a good example. Like if you
mhm,
as a parent gets involved in some kind of a nonprofit or volunteering activity, and even if they don't let kids do it, sometimes there are family events that they hold, like family barbecues and stuff like
mhm,
that, where
mhm,
kids get to know all the other kids of the other volunteers and stuff like that. And at the same time, you are setting a great example for your kids, because
mhm,
I remember what it felt like, and that's why I work in nonprofits now, is because my dad. It's
mhm,
the example that he set for me. I remember watching him help people my whole entire life, and that's all I could think about growing up, is that that's
mhm.
what I wanted to do. So that's why I'm in International Atheists now, and why you
And
should definitely be a member.
that's right. Um, so we're talking about this in the context of children and helping our children to be exposed to more people, more communities. But also, this is something that is a huge issue for a lot of people who divorce religion. They've lost that community that was so integral to their life. I mean, when you're devout in your beliefs, you center your life around those beliefs. And so then when those beliefs are no longer there and everything dissolves, you're starting from the ground up. And so all these same things that we've been mentioning as ways to help build community for our children can also be applicable to us. And don't forget something as simple as hobbies and things that bring you joy. Doesn't matter how off the wall your hobby or interest might be, there will be other people out there with that same interest. So your life, instead of having that one, central core interest, your life becomes more of a patchwork quilt where you've got this community over here and this community, and you love being part of this community, and that can work out beautifully as well.
Hmm. And I know that there are also, like, if you are actually looking for some kind of community centered around atheism or humanism, there are tons of opportunities for that too. Like, you mentioned some of the gatherings on Sundays, but there are also just in our area, the Kelowna Humanist and
Kelowna Atheist Skeptics and Humanist Association,
yeah,
CASHA.
yeah, and they move or they meet up a lot in our area, and I know because I get the notifications all the time.
I'm a
Um,
member too.
Well, I can't wait till the pandemic is over. Then Janice and I have met once, and we live an hour away. I can't wait till we can hang out again. But
I'm just going to move in next door to you.
yeah, hopefully we'll be able to at some point do this podcast in person at some point.
That sounds good. I like
But
it.
yeah, there are tons of atheist meetups, and there's something called Skeptics in the Pub too. I think that the Kasha actually does that sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Skeptics in the Pub is everywhere, all over the world. Like they have it in England, they have it in Australia. It's all over the place, and you can all you do is search Google for Skeptics in the Pub and your area, and you'll probably find one close to you. And then there's also like meetup.com if you search your area.
Yay, I love meetups. Yeah.
Yeah, meetup.com, you search your area and you can find meetups. And right now a lot of those meetups are happening on like Zoom and stuff like that. So it's not, even though the pandemic is happening, it doesn't mean that you can't find your community. You can totally still do it. So Prophet of Zod says, I wish I lived an hour away from my friends. I have a lot of friends on here that I don't know if I'll ever meet. Like Simon is in England, and Oz, Mr. Oz is watching us right now, and he's in Australia. I would just love to meet Donovan so much.
Let's do a field trip. Let's take our show on the road.
Yeah, atheist retreat in Australia.
Yes.
Although I've always maintained that I think the best place in the world for an atheist retreat would be right here in the Okanagan.
I concur.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We live in a really, really beautiful place.
We're surrounded by vineyards.
Yes. Hundreds of vineyards. It's a great place. But yeah, there's a lot of ways to build your community. And oh yeah, see, Simon mentioned Camp Quest. Camp Quest is all over the world too, I believe, or most of the world. And it's a camp, like summer camp kind of a thing for non-believers.
I love that. That is a great idea.
Yeah, actually, it's a really good organization to donate to. There's not often that I tell you to donate to some other organization outside of mine, but do it. It's amazing. They're helping to raise critical thinking children, and that I think is one of the most important things. Donovan says, Simon says, "Can I suggest Cape Town?" Actually, Simon, I'm not reading. I'm listening to Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime, right now. So I'm learning all about South Africa. Simon's from South Africa. And I'm learning all about it. And it's wow. He's funny.
He is hilarious.
But there's some seriously sad things in his stories.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love the idea of Camp Quest because religion has had, so many thousands of years to become organized. Religion is very organized. That's why religion is very successful. So we really do need to be donating to some of these other groups that are promoting critical thinking, healthier secular thinking, because we want to be raising up those kids then to become the politicians and make the laws instead of religious ones.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, we've been at this for about an hour. And I think in the future, because this is our first episode, so things are rusty, and you have to bear with us. And always feel free to send us suggestions, constructive criticism. Both Janice and I can handle it. We have thick skin. And in the future, we want to be able to, well, we're gonna download the audio from this, and we're gonna put it onto like the iTunes and everything like that, so you can actually listen to it
What?
as well. And if you don't want to look at our faces, but I can't imagine why you wouldn't, because Janice is beautiful. But in the future, we want to be able to answer your questions. So if you have questions, like questions that you think that we can talk about for a good amount of time, then send them in to us, and we'll set them up for a future podcast. The description, or the information on how to do that, is in the description down below. You can just go fill out a form and send us your question, and we will sometimes even do, and maybe have some resources for you and stuff like that. And yeah, that's basically
And is
what.
our plan to meet on Saturdays, to keep meeting on Saturdays?
Yeah, we're gonna keep doing this on Saturdays because we both work, and Saturdays are only free day, really.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have Sundays free now because my Browns are out of the playoffs, but
Ew.
but you know what? They had the best season they've ever had since I've been a fan. And they've that was the first time they made it to the playoffs in 18 years.
Well, that's
Yeah,
pretty cool.
it was pretty exciting. It was pretty
Mm-hmm.
exciting. It was like one of those feel good sports movies. I really enjoyed this season.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Sorry. I know everybody's always like apologizes to me when I tell them that I'm a Browns. But you know what? I can be proud of them now. They did good. So yeah, so that's it. So if you have a question, send it to the link down below. You can fill out the form, or you can just email us or tweet me or whatever you want to do. And we will be back to talk to you again next Saturday. Thank you so much for hanging out and chatting with me, Janice.
Yes, thank you. This was so much fun. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. This was just great.
Yeah, we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye, everyone.